Hello folks, J. Scott Phillips here. Today we are bound for inner space with a look at Isaac Asimov's novelization of the 1966 20th Century Fox movie, Fantastic Voyage. And it was first published in an abridged and serialized form in the February 26 and March 12, 1966 issues of the Saturday Evening Post, and then as a full novel by Houghton Mifflin in March of 1966. And this is an offering to spring into adventure, a BookTube event created for the month of April by Mark at Book Time with Elvis and Sean D. Standfast to celebrate adventure fiction. And they have a few co-hosts as well, and I will list all of their channels in the notes down below. So if you are an adventure fiction fan, be sure and check them out. And they've split the month of April up into 4 weeks, and this is my offering for week 3, on which I am horribly late on. But week 1 was to look at adventure fiction of the short form, 200 pages or less, and week 2 was the long form, over 200 pages in length, and week 3 is for adaptations, and that could be adaptation from a movie or a comic book or a cartoon or any other kind of media, but then adapted into novelization form. So we're going to take a look at Fantastic Voyage today. Now, a lot of people have always assumed that the movie was based on the book by Isaac Asimov, and that's not the case, and we're going to take a look at that today, as well as some of the artwork that came along with those publications, various editions, magazine, hardcover, and paperback. So we'll get to that a little later. But first, let's look to see here how Isaac Asimov came to be writing a novelization of a film in the first place. Isaac Asimov, of course, was one of the original Golden Age science fiction writers, and by 1965, he'd been writing science fiction for over 25 years. And he was also a scientist himself and had been a professor of biochemistry at Boston University School of Medicine. And that's has some importance to the story we're talking about today. Now, to set things up here, in April of 1965, the movie Fantastic Voyage was in production. And if you don't know, the premise is that there is this secret government technology that's being worked on that can shrink anything down to microscopic size. The only problem is that the effect only lasts for some reason exactly 60 minutes, 1 hour only. And but there is this scientist who works for the other side, and he has the secret to extending that miniaturization indefinitely. So he's very important, and he wants to defect to the United States. So one of our agents, Grant, extracts him from the other side and is transporting him to headquarters here in the United States to work on this very secret and important project. But while he's being driven to headquarters, the car that he's being driven in is attacked. It's rammed, and then gunfire breaks out, and he is injured in the car crash and then is shot. And that all leads to him falling into a coma, and he's developed a very dangerous, life-threatening brain tumor. But it's inoperable. So the only thing that they can think to do, and that they're going to do, is to use this miniaturization technology and shrink an experimental submarine down to microscopic size along with a crew and inject it into the scientist's bloodstream, and then they can navigate through the body up to the brain and destroy the brain tumor with a laser rifle from inside the scientist's body. Very risky, never been tried, and so therefore we have adventure and intrigue following throughout the rest of the story. Now, Bantam Books at that time had the paperback rights to publish a novelization of Fantastic Voyage, and they came to Isaac Asimov to write it for them. And they told him that they could pay him $5,000, but no royalties to write this book for them, kind of a one-and-done deal. And Asimov was not interested. He was Isaac Asimov, too big of a name, too established of a science fiction author to sully his name with doing hack work like writing a novelization. He didn't do that. So he turned it down. But Bantam really wanted him to do it. So they kept cajoling him, and they were whining and dining him and flattering him, which is always a good idea if you're dealing with Isaac Asimov. And at least to the point where he agreed to read the screenplay before he just said no outright. And so read it he did, and he was surprised to find that he actually liked the story and wanted to write the book. It had a lot of physics in it and a lot of biochemistry, and he had been writing essays and nonfiction short articles about those kinds of things for years by this time. And so he also felt that if anyone else wrote this book, if he didn't do it, any other author would botch it completely, and he didn't want that, so he agreed to do it. But he had a problem with one point of the story, and this is a mild spoiler alert, so if you haven't seen the movie, you might go watch the movie and come back, or if it doesn't matter, it's not really that big of a deal. But at the end of the movie, the submarine, as it's shrunk down, as it's starting to expand now after the time limit is up, it becomes large enough in the bloodstream that white blood cells start to attack and devour the ship. The crew is still small enough to escape through along the optic nerve and out through a tear duct. But the ship itself is destroyed in the bloodstream of the scientist. And Asimov is saying, you can't do that. You've got to get the ship out of there too. But it's been consumed it's already destroyed in the body. So, well, no, the sub has been destroyed, but the molecular integrity of it, its atomic structure in whatever form it's in, is still going to grow and wind up killing the guy. We've got to get that sub out of there. I've got to write it that way. Well, the studio isn't going to change the movie, and Asimov is saying, that's okay, they don't need to change the movie, but in my book, I've got to get that sub out of there. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. It's just kind of dumb. So, well, all right. So they agreed to let him write it that way as long as the studio wouldn't change it back after Asimov was done writing with it. They could do whatever they want with the movie, but his book, he just wanted that little piece of scientific integrity. However, the rest of the science works in the thing is maybe questionable, but that made sense to Asimov, and that was a condition. So they agreed to that. But then he had some other writing assignments that he had to take care of before he started working on it. And during that time, he started to realize, wait, I've got another problem with this Bantam deal, and that is that he understood that a paperback novelization of a movie was nothing but a publicity or promotional item for the movie itself, and that once the movie, however good it might be or not, ran its course in the theaters, people would forget about it and also forget about the novelization. And he couldn't have that. He didn't want anything that he wrote lost to just the waxings and wanings of pop culture. So he thought the way to ensure that it wouldn't happen, that it would have some legitimate longevity, was to have it published first as a hardback. And so he went to Bantam and talked to him about that. And they said, well, we can't do that. Our deal is with the studio, and it's just for paperback, and that's it. And they're certainly not going to pony up the money for a hardback or pay you more for hardback rights or something if that's what this is about. And Asimov said, it's not about the money. Don't pay me for the hardback. I just want to make sure that there is a hardback edition so that it will generate sales down through the years and not just come and go with this movie, however well it does. So Bantam thought, well, we want to keep our boy happy here, so let's see if we can get Grosset and Dunlap to do it. They've done this kind of thing for us before. Maybe they'll do it in this case. And so they went to Grosset and Dunlap, and they said, nope, we're not going to do it. Sorry, and sent them on their way. So back to Asimov now, and he thought, well, I'm pretty important over at Doubleday. They're my science fiction publishers, and they'll do this for me because I'm their man. I'm Isaac Asimov. They'll do this for me. So he went to Doubleday, and they said, well, we'd like to help you, but the problem is that if we have any issues with anything during the publication of this, we can't talk to you about it. We've got to deal with the studio, and we don't want to do that. And we don't have the paperback rights for it, so we don't have that to work with, so we're going to have to say no and sorry. So now Asimov was really upset. He didn't want to write this thing just as a come-and-go paperback, but he set it aside and got back to work on other things. One of the books he was working on was a book on how to use the slide rule, of all things, for Houghton Mifflin. And so now, I think it was in July, he is going to talk to an editor there about the manuscript. And the editor brings up the Fantastic Voyage book. He says, we've kind of heard about this hardback edition that you're trying to get done for Fantastic Voyage, and that sounds interesting. We might be kind of interested in maybe taking a look at that. And Asimov perks up. He says, here's a carbon copy of the manuscript, or of the manuscript. Take a look at it and get back to me. That would be awesome if you could do that. And so nothing happens. About a month later, he's back in talking about the slide rule book again, and he has to ask, "What's up with Fantastic Voyage? You like it? You're gonna do the hardback edition?" And they say, "Well, we're kind of interested in it, but thinking about it now, we've never published any science fiction ever before, and so we don't really know how to promote such a thing. And then not only that, but once Bantam comes out with the paperback edition, no one's going to want to pay the money for a hardback anymore. It's just going to be too expensive with the paperback out there." And Asimov says, "Well, that's not true. You just put my name on it and it'll sell like hotcakes." And they say, "Well, we don't know about that. We don't know how to promote this sort of thing anyway. Sure, you're a big name, but it's just going to be too expensive." He says, No. 15 years ago, I, Robot first came out as a hardback, and it's been published as paperbacks for years ever since then. The hardback is still bringing in the bucks. It's still selling like hotcakes, and no problem. Trust me on this." So Houghton Mifflin said, "Well, okay, we'll give it a try." So now there's been a hardback deal cut, and is Asimov happy? No, because now Doubleday is coming back to the table, and they are interested in publishing Fantastic Voyage now as part of their science fiction book club line. And they've often done that. They would often go to other publishers to publish other science fiction works as a Doubleday science fiction book club edition. And in the case of Fantastic Voyage, they wouldn't have to worry about dealing with the studio. That's all been handled. They don't have to fall back on any paperback rights, anything like that. That's not part of the science fiction book club. So that was great. And Asimov now is getting upset because he's not getting anything for this. And even though that was the deal, he's thinking that, the studio is getting all this money for nothing that they ever were pursued themselves. This is all me. I generated all this. I brokered the hardback deal, which led to the book club deal and all that. And then he found out that Houghton Mifflin had sold the serialization rights to the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. And Asimov thought that was great. He'd never thought of serialization as another means of getting the book out there and giving it some longevity. But he wasn't getting any part of that either. So he went back to Houghton Mifflin and he asked them to pressure the studio to get Asimov something at least for all this work that he's put in that they're profiting from. And Asimov, shouldn't he get something for all that work? And so they have to deal with Otto Klement. He was the guy who wrote the treatment for the screenplay for Fantastic Voyage, and he was the one who was getting the majority of the royalties. And it was him that could share in the royalties if he wanted to. And of course, it seemed like he didn't want to. And then he actually killed the deal with the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, and that really upset Asimov now. And he just felt that Klement was just going to be difficult to deal with, and he was getting mad at himself for ever having brought up the subject of a hardback edition in the first place. He just felt stupid for having done that. It was just a big mistake, and he just wished he could put it behind him, but there it was. So now a couple months later, it's now December of 1965, and he finds out to his chagrin that Otto Klement has cut a deal for a serialization with the Saturday Evening Post. and cut Asimov in for half the royalties of that, which would amount to 6 times the royalties that he would have gotten for any of these other deals. So now Asimov was just ashamed of himself for having doubted it, and was also kind of ashamed that the movie industry knew more about publishing than he did, but was grateful for it, and so was feeling a lot better about the whole project now. That was much more to his liking. Then in February, late February of 1966 now, the February 26th issue of the Saturday Evening Post came out with the first installment of the serialization for Fantastic Voyage. And then a couple weeks later, the March 12th issue came out with the conclusion. So it was in 2 issues of the Post. And then about that same time, the Houghton Mifflin came to Asimov and said that during that first week of March, that they had already sold 6,000 copies of the hardback edition of Fantastic Voyage, and their break-even point was 8,000. So they were already well on the way, and the book had not even come out yet. It wasn't going to come out for a couple more weeks. So this was thrilling to Asimov and to Houghton Mifflin. They were very happy that they took this deal after all. But the reason, or because it came out in February and March in 2 different publication forms, to this day, it's the reason why people will often think that the movie Fantastic Voyage was based on Asimov's book rather than the other way around, and that idea largely persists even to today. But the movie wasn't even going to come out until August, so it was that far out ahead of it, August of 66. In July of 66, Asimov and his family were invited to a special preview of the movie, which he went to, and he was sitting next to his 11-year-old daughter while they're watching the movie. And at the end of the movie, when the sub is gobbled up by the white blood cell, Asimov's 11-year-old daughter looks up to him and says, but Daddy, won't the ship still get bigger and wind up killing the man anyway? And Asimov just nodded, yes, honey, yes, dear, it will. It's going to kill him. And so Asimov was very pleased with the way he had changed his own writing of the story, because he felt that even his 11-year-old daughter was smarter than all of Hollywood. So now that brings us up to talking about. Oh, I guess I should also say finally the Bantam edition came out a month after the movie in September of 1966. So now let's talk about actually reading the book. And I bought the book. It was that very first paperback edition that came out in September of 66. When it came out, I was just 10 years old that summer. And I had seen the movie come out the month before, and I remember going to see it at the Century 21 movie theater in Anaheim, California, where I grew up. And it was a brand new theater in those days. It maybe been open for a year or 2, and it was very space age and modern looking. It looked like something out of the Jetsons. And I was going for the first time to see a big special effects, big budget science fiction movie, and I was a science fiction fan for a long time. I'd seen science fiction movies at theaters before, drive-ins and matinees, things like that, but they're always older movies, and then seen a lot of them on TV, shown on TV. But this was the first time I'd gotten to see a brand new movie in watching this movie at Century 21 was like watching a movie in a spaceship. And I was just thrilled to see it. The special effects were great. We'd been studying about human anatomy in our health class in the 5th or 6th grade, whatever it was then. And so we were kind of familiar with seeing inside the human body, inside the heart, inside the brain, the lungs, inside the circulatory system, all that. And so here it was on the big screen in just beautiful, bright, brilliant colors. And the special effects were just awesome to me. Don't know if they hold up quite as well today, but for its day, it was fantastic. My eyes were just huge. And of course, Raquel Welch was in it, so that might have had something to do with that. But I really enjoyed the movie, and as far as the book goes, came out a month later. I rushed out and bought it because I loved the movie so much, and put it on a bookshelf and forgot all about it. It's been sitting on bookshelves and in moving boxes and things all these years. But I finally pulled it out. I've always meant to read it. I always wanted to read it, but just never got around to it. It's not very long. I should have done it years ago. But I did it specifically now for Spring into Adventure. And so I pulled it out and dusted it off and read it and enjoyed it. It wasn't a great book, but it was fun to read. And years ago, I had heard the story about Asimov insisting on getting the sub out of the body and not just letting it dissolve inside the guy's brain. It would kill him. So I was always interested how he did that, but I guess not interested enough to actually read it and find out. But the rest of the book follows pretty much the movie except for that one item. So just for that alone, to me, it was worth reading. It's not a very long book, so it wasn't too tough to get through after all these years. And it was fun to revisit the story. And there were some differences in it other than that as well. It starts off where they are rescuing the scientist. His name is Beamish, with the secret on how to extend the duration of the miniaturization effect. And he is defecting from the other side. It's never said what the other side is. Asimov set the book 50 years in the future. The movie was set in current day in 1966. So they were dealing with the Soviets then. It was during the Cold War. That's ambiguous in Asimov's telling of it. He just said it 50 years or so in the future, and it's supposed to be 1995, well in the future. And so we don't know if it's the Soviets or not. They just call it the other side in cap letters, and then our side is our side. So our side and their side, or us and them, is how that's always referred to. So that was kind of interesting. And then there is other technology that is also advanced. So there's a lot more advanced transportation systems and medical advancements and things like that that weren't in the movie other than the miniaturization itself. But it's clearly in a future, ambiguous as it is, in Asimov's telling of it. And he goes to the extra effort of trying to explain the miniaturization physics, and that's not touched on in the movie. In the movie, we just see the apparatus shrinking the machine or shrinking the ship, and then the process of injecting it into the bloodstream, and all that is shown but not explained. And Asimov tries to explain it. At least he tries to explain it. I don't know if it makes a lot of sense, but somehow when everything is miniaturized, it does not retain its mass. The mass somehow and the weight of things is shifted over into some side dimension or something in exchange for size here, mass increases there. And so there's a balance somehow between these two platforms or something. Doesn't make a lot of sense. And then another thing that really doesn't make sense to me is that not just the physical properties of anything shrinks down, but so does light itself. Light gets miniaturized. I don't know how that works because there are windows and portals all around this ship, and they can see into out of the ship, but into the body. And the light out there is not reduced down, but it has the effect apparently that the colors of things in the body have shifted. They're not quite accurate. So when they're looking at the red corpuscles and things, they're not quite red exactly. And why is that? It's because the light outside the ship is so much larger than the light inside the ship. That doesn't make much sense to me. But another thing that happens when they miniaturize is that time dilates somehow. So they have a little more time, not a lot, but a little more time. So that comes in handy when they're having certain adventures inside the body, especially when it comes down to that 60-minute countdown. They're able to extend that a little bit because time takes a little longer at that size. They're still sweating it out up in the operating room and in the control center because their time is just marching ahead with that clock. But it buys them a little time inside the sub, inside the body. So that was kind of interesting. Not really explained, but an interesting point. And then another thing that Asimov does is something that I don't think he's given credit for much, and I don't think he really does it all that much either, but he developed the characters much more than they are in the movie. The interrelationships and the kind of petty rivalries and things between some of the scientists and doctors and things and some of the military that is expanded quite a bit in the book, and that makes it more interesting when you're reading the story that, when I was reading it, it's so familiar because I've known the movie so well over the years, that it added a little something other than just getting the sub out of there. The characters felt more genuine to me, and in fact, something that's not touched on in the movie at all, in Asimov's telling of it, there's a budding romance between the agent Grant and the doctor's assistant Cora, played by Raquel Welch in the movie. That's not touched on at all in the movie. There might be some flirtations or something in the movie, but in the book, it's blossoming into this full-fledged romance by the end of the story, and that was something that I wasn't used to Asimov doing much of. So that was interesting. So that's kind of my reflections on reading the book. Not a great read, but it was a lot of fun, especially kind of balancing all these things that I knew about how Asimov wrote it and comparing it to the movie and all that. But now, like I usually like to do, is to talk about some of the artwork. So let's look at the artwork of the novelization of Fantastic Voyage, and we'll start with those Saturday Evening Post issues. Now, these are the two issues in question here, the February 26th and March 12th, 1966 issues of the Saturday Evening Post. And I knew that Fantastic Voyage had been serialized in these two issues here, so for this video, I ordered them off of eBay to take a look at the illustrations. I was really looking forward to that, because in two issues, the Post would usually do 3 to 4 or more illustrations for such a story. And I did a video similar to this one last year for June on the Range for the novelization of the Western True Grit. And that had also been serialized in the Saturday Evening Post. And it had some fantastic illustrations in it. So I was looking forward to this. But True Grit was serialized in the Post when the novel was coming out. So the movie True Grit was not in production yet. Unlike Fantastic Voyage, which was already in production when they approached Asimov in the first place. So I was a bit disappointed to find out that the Post issues here only had photography and frame captures from the movie itself. But they're still pretty interesting shots, and you can kind of, if you haven't seen the movie, you can kind of get a sense of how great I guess they were sets, the special effects and the sets for this movie, how they were. And it'll also kind of help us to walk through the story a little bit here in a quick way. And then the next few that we look at are book covers only. So we'll take a look at those, and then we'll wrap it up. So let's start here with the first spread of the first installment of Fantastic Voyage in Saturday Evening Post from February of 1966. And the great thing about these old magazines is that the Saturday Evening Post was a very large format magazine, a kind of a broadsheet size, very much larger than the magazines that we see on the newsstands today. So when you do have artwork in those magazine articles, they take up some acreage, and they're really fun to look at, and are much more compelling than the little images that we might get in some publications now that deal at all with fiction, if they ever do even. So this is the opening spread. But let's take a closer look at all these photos one by one across the two issues here. And the first image here is a scene from near the end of the movie, actually, even though it's our opening spread here. And it shows the Proteus. That's the name of the sub, the Proteus. And it is seen here in the brain. So all those tendrils and things that you see hanging back there are the synapses and structures inside the brain, and not added in here yet because it was probably done in post for the movie. But in the movie, when you watch this part of the film, you get to see all these little sparks and zaps of electricity traveling up and down all that moss-looking stuff there. Those are the little electric sparks firing the synapses in the brain and sending signals to the rest of the body. We don't see that here, but we do get a good shot of the Proteus to set the mood for the story, and then also a glimpse at inside the human brain. And as these photos are organized in the publication of the magazine, they're a little bit out of order to the sequence that you would see them in the story itself. But this next one, we see Beamish. He was played by Gene Duvall, and we see him lying here on the operating table at the government headquarters here. And you can see that his scalp has been marked off in lines of longitude and latitude. And then around him, you can see these little radar scanners that were going up and down that could read the presence of the Proteus as it traveled through his body. It's nuclear powered, so they're able to track the atomic signal through this little radar array here. Now, this next shot actually happens in the story a little earlier. The movie starts off with our introduction to Beamish. He is the scientist defecting from the other side who has the secret to extending the miniaturization process indefinitely. And as he's being transported from the airport to the government base where these experiments are being conducted, his car is rammed by another car, and then gunfire breaks out, and he is injured in that and falls into a coma and develops that brain tumor that they've got to operate on. Now, this might be a good place to mention the name of this project that the government is carrying on. So Beamish is being taken to the headquarters of CMDF, which stood for Combined Miniature Deterrent Forces. And they make a little bit of a joke about that in the movie and the book of Grant when he is enlisted to come and help with this assignment here. He doesn't know what it stands for. He's never heard of this miniaturization process before. So he's always coming up with his own words to fill in the initials here. This was back in the day, and I guess they still do this, where everything has to have an acronym. And at least this one doesn't spell something out like thrush or chaos or shield or any of it. At least but it's just CMDF. And so they all wear these CMDF patches throughout the movie. Now, here we see the info dump portion of the movie. Early on, during a briefing at the lab headquarters here, we see Donald Pleasance. He is playing Dr. Michaels, and he has scanned Beamish's body atomically somehow and developed a very clear roadmap, images of the circulatory system, and he will be part of the crew reduced down in the Proteus and injected into Beamish's body, and he will act as the navigator then to see them safely through all the comings and goings and highways and byways of the circulatory system up to the brain tumor. And this image here, I think, is kind of a cool effect because in the movie, it's being projected on a screen behind him. So we see a part of that image projected across Dr. Michael's face here, and we get that kind of bloody look as the veins and arteries are projected on his face, which may be kind of a foreshadowing of things to happen later in the story, perhaps. And now here's a nice image of the entire crew inside the Proteus. And this is during the miniaturization process. And we can see up through the windows at the top and through the dome where the pilot is sitting. That is the array of the miniaturization machinery. And in the movie, you see that getting, I guess it's getting smaller as it's moving farther away as we're in the sub getting miniaturized. Always felt like it should be the other way around. It looks like it's moving away from the apparatus up above, but I always thought, shouldn't it be getting larger if they're getting smaller? Not sure how that should really look from inside the sub, but it's an interesting effect. And then it also gives us our first look at the entire crew assembled here. And we see, starting off on the far left here, and first and foremost, we see Raquel Welch as Cora Peterson. She's Dr. Duvall's lovely assistant. And then moving to the right, we see Arthur Kennedy playing Dr. Duvall. He is the surgeon that is going to attempt to remove the brain tumor from Beamish's brain with that laser rifle. Then we see Donald Pleasance again as Dr. Michaels. He's the navigator. And then we see Stephen Boyd. He plays the agent Grant. And then up above, we see Captain Owens. That's played by William Redfield. He's the guy who designed the Proteus, and so he is the skipper and the pilot of the sub. And then last but not least, on the far left, we see Raquel Welch again. And sure, she's Duvall's assistant, but let's face it, she's really on board because she looks great in a skin-tight scuba suit that comes up a little later. Now, the pacing in the movie is a little slow compared to movies today, I think. They spend a lot of time showing the process of the miniaturization and all the things involved in getting the ship injected into the body, and all that takes a long time. But it's really juicy stuff for the audience of its day, and I was hanging on every frame. But it is a little sluggish to watch now because they're having to be so careful and so quiet with all of this equipment and stuff. But here in this next image, we see one of the lab techs. The Proteus has been reduced down to about the size of a matchbox car, and he is very delicately dropping it into this giant cylinder of fluid, which is then going to be miniaturized with the sub in it down and to become a part of the syringe that will be injecting the Proteus into the bloodstream. And that brings us up to the second issue and the conclusion of the serialization in the Saturday Evening Post. And here is the opening spread, and then we will take a closer look at that first image there as the title page for the conclusion. And we see here a little later in the story now, the Proteus has been injected into the carotid artery of Beamish, and then it should be a short jaunt from there to the brain and to the site of the tumor. But of course, there is adventure involved here, and right away, once they are injected into the bloodstream, they hit a weak part in the capillary and fall into this whirlpool and are pulled way off course and wind up having to go backtracking back through the heart, which is very dangerous. And at this point, the Proteus has been damaged and they have lost most of their oxygen. They have just enough to breathe through their reserve tanks to get out of the body, but they're going to have to abort the mission until Stephen Boyd, Grant comes up with the idea that, wait a minute, we're not very far away from the lungs. If all these corpuscles in the blood system here can draw oxygen from the lungs, why can't we? So that seems like a good idea. So another adventure coming up here. So in this scene, we see where Grant, I keep wanting to say Boyd, Grant has been trying to siphon the air out of the lungs, but he gets pulled into the lung when Beamish is inhaling, and he is kind of separated now from the crew and stuck in a lung here. And those big black rocks there, those are little tiny bits of carbon that Beamish has been inhaling. And this struck me at the time, as watching this for the first time, that it was a comment on pollution, which we were all talking about in the news and dealing with in LA. The air pollution was horrible. And so, of course, Beamish has all these big, giant chunks of black rock lining his lungs. But here we get to see Grant dealing with that and trying to survive and get out of the lungs. So once they survive that little adventure, they're proceeding, but have realized that it's just too dangerous to travel through the circulatory system. So they're going to try to travel through the lymphatic system, which is much slower and sludgier, but probably safer as a result. But once they get in there, they find out that it is just too slow going, and they're running out of time now at this point. So they've got to find another way of getting to the brain tumor. And they're near the inner ear now, so they decide they're going to travel through the inner ear and get out of the lymphatic system. But the problem here is that there are all these reticular fibers in the inner ear. That's this seaweed-looking stuff. And they're clinging to the ship as they travel through the very narrow passage here. And the fibers are clogging up the intake vents in the ship. And that's going to stop them for good. So they've got the 4 of the 5 of the crew, 4 of them have to go outside and pull all those fibers out of the vent so that the ship can continue. But of course, there's a problem in the inner ear, and that is the huge danger coming from outside. And that is that any sound that is made at all in the operating room where they're working on Beamish will cause what it amounts to a magnitude 10 earthquake in the inner ear and will just bash the ship and its crew to pieces. And so they have to have absolute quiet while they are traveling through this area. And now it's taking extra long because they've got to unclog the vents of the ship. So this image here we get to see from the control room Looking down onto the operating theater there, we see all the doctors and nurses standing very quietly as they can around Beamish. But upstairs here in the operating room, or rather in the control room, we see on the far left is General Carter, played by Edmund O'Brien, and on the far right is Arthur O'Connell as Colonel Reed. Now, we don't see it here, but during the entire operation, whenever we see these guys up in the control room, both Carter and Reed are always puffing on cigars throughout the entire operation. And I've always taken it that the cigars were meant as a visual clue to us in the audience that time's burning. And as the movie progresses and they keep running out of time and it's cutting it closer and closer, the cigars are getting shorter and shorter, and so is their patience and their tempers. So I always thought that was kind of an interesting little thing, as subtle as it was. Back when this movie came out, no one thought at all anything about smoking cigars in movies. But looking back now, I got to think that nobody should be smoking cigars around all that sensitive computer equipment in those days, and that probably both these guys have a lot of those big black rock chunks in their own lungs to deal with at some point in the future. But it was the 1960s and nobody cared. So this next image is another one that's out of sequence. And this is from earlier when the Proteus has run out of oxygen and is trying to siphon oxygen out of the lungs, and so they're up against the lining of the lung wall here and running that tube in there. And it, for some reason, it took the entire crew except for the pilot to do this, but it's a good thing because we got a chance to see Raquel Welch in her scuba suit, and that was a problem anyway because that was causing the entire crew to breathe too heavily anyway and run out of oxygen even quicker. But we were grateful for it watching the movie. And then finally, we're in the brain, and here we get to see Dr. Duvall shooting the laser rifle at the tumor, which is off screen there. The laser beam has not been added here yet. I guess it's in post-production or maybe between shots. But then we see Raquel Welch here as Duvall's assistant, and she's got this little tray strapped around her waist here that has a bunch of equipment and paraphernalia in case Duvall needs it. They're supposedly floating in brain fluid here. I have no idea how things sitting on a tray in fluid is going to be very useful, but it doesn't matter. We're not looking at the tray anyway. Now we'll move on to the book covers themselves, and there are 4 of them, and we'll start off with the Houghton Mifflin edition from March 1966. That was also picked up for the Doubleday Science Fiction Book Club edition. And its illustration is by Dale Hennesy. And we get this kind of neat partial wraparound image of the Proteus somewhere in the human body here. Not sure where it is. It's a bit ambiguous, but that's okay. If I were to take a guess, though, I would say this is probably in the pleural sac between the chest wall and the lungs. That's only a guess, but it's still a nice illustration, and it does capture the essence of almost anywhere during the Fantastic Voyage, where it could be in the body. We get to see some little nodules floating around there that are probably some kind of blood cells or antibodies or something, and then kind of an undersea version, but all red, so it's very organic looking. A nice illustration, and I think is a nice invitation to read the book. And then there is the Bantam paperback edition from September of 1966 that started it all. No illustrator involved here. This was a pickup and kind of a repurposing and recolored version of the original artwork from the theatrical posters. So whoever built this, the production artists on this, found an eye somewhere. That does not look like Beamish's eye, but doesn't really matter. The skin divers there, or our crew, a few of them from the Proteus, are just clipped out from frames from the movie in all kinds of tumultuous poses and things. But it does kind of refer to the climax of the story here, where they are making their escape from Beamish's body out through the eye and the tear duct. And an effective cover overall, I think, because by the time this came out, people would have been familiar with the movie and the movie poster in particular. And so they would see this and immediately recognize it for what it is. Nice, bright color on there, the purple type and all that. It probably was pretty effective on the bookstore shelves of the day. There is that little golden seal down in the bottom right after the title. It's blank. I don't know what that is. It was probably intended to have something like first time in paperback written on it or something, but they didn't do that. Instead, it's just an empty gold seal for some reason. Doesn't matter, I guess, but does add a little extra color to the cover, but that just seems an odd way to do it. Now, we'll jump ahead a couple of decades here now for this next book cover, and this book is basically a reprint of the Bantam Books edition, but it is now on the Bantam Spectra imprint from 1982, and it's got a cover by Howard Koslow. And it's a pretty good image, I think, of the Proteus heading into a blood vessel, and it's certainly reminiscent of the movie and of the story itself. But it's one of those cover layouts that kind of bugs me. I've talked about this on this channel a few times before, and that is where they confine the artwork to a tiny little space, in this case a little square on the cover, rather than a full bleed image that takes up the whole cover, making room for the type itself, of course. But I'd much rather see that whole image fill the cover. I know the title is nice and large, but these kinds of book cover illustrations here don't jump off a bookshelf to me in a bookstore. I sure we see Isaac Asimov, and he were to tell you that that's what's selling the book. But for me, it's always been the artwork on the cover that draws me in for a book that I want to keep. Now, Howard Koslow has never been an artist that I've really been too aware of. He didn't do all that many book covers, but he's the only artist that is credited for any of the artwork in this video. And so, and he did a lot of interesting stuff. So let's take a quick look at some of his work, and I'll just put up on the screen here kind of a little conveyor belt of some of his more notable things to talk about while we look at the art. Koslow was born in Brooklyn in 1924, and he studied art at the Pratt Institute and at the School of Visual Arts in Manhattan. And as I say, he didn't illustrate just book covers. He actually did a lot of work for NASA and for the Pentagon, and was really pretty well known, mostly I think, for illustrating a lot of commemorative stamps for the U.S. Post Office. He did a lot of those over the years, and we're looking at just a few of them here. But he was not really known for his book covers, although he did some science fiction covers which showed some of his NASA chops, I think, with spaceships and things like that. And then he did do some fantasy covers, most notably for a series of books by James Branch Cabell. And so with all of that, would it have been too much to ask for a full bleed illustration on Fantastic Voyage? And then a few years later, we get this last entry here, again from Bantam Spectra from 1988. And this kind of illustrates, no pun intended, what I was talking about as far as a full bleed. Now, there's no artist credited for this one. It's a little cartoony for my taste. It's not too bad, but it's similar enough to the one before where it was just boxed in that little square. But even though I don't think the artwork is as good as the previous one, it looks a lot better on a bookshelf to me. It's got that full bleed, still gives room for all the type and Asimov's name. He'd be happy with that, and that kind of a thing. It just is just a much more attractive looking book in general, I would say, and I think would have more prominence on a bookstore shelf. And that's all the cover art that I've got for you today. I should probably mention that a few years after he wrote Fantastic Voyage, Asimov wrote not a sequel really, but another book called Fantastic Voyage 2. And I should say I don't believe that it's a sequel. I think it's his attempt to just fix the story, to write it from the ground up in his own way. And I have not read it. The only thing I know about it for sure is that instead of 60 minutes for the whole adventure, he gives his crew 12 hours to perform the mission. And other than that, I don't really know anything about it, other than I'm assuming that it's, like I say, it's his attempt to fix the story and tell it his own way. And if you've read it yourself, let me know in the comments down below. Did you like it? Is it worth the read? Is it better than the original Fantastic Voyage? Let me know. And then also, having reviewed all these covers here, and I'll put these up one more time on the screen all together so you can take one last look at it. Let me know if you've got a favorite cover out of the batch, and if you've read Fantastic Voyage yourself, or if you're in general an Isaac Asimov fan, if you got a favorite Asimov book that you like. And does this seem similar to any of them? To me, it's completely different from the Asimov that I've read myself. But let me know. And so there you have it. Once again, folks, thanks for joining me. I'd like to thank once again Mark at Book Time with Elvis and Sean D. Standfast and all of their co-hosts for Spring Into Adventure. I probably won't have time now with just a few days left to do week 4. I'm hopelessly behind. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I had fun putting this one together again. And until we get a chance to chat again, thanks a lot.